Welcome back, YouTube, to the next episode of the educational series. Apologies for the short hiatus. We've had things going on, but we are back in full flow. So, this episode, it was a very big hitter on Instagram, and I think this will be relevant for a lot of people who are coming to the end of their dieting phases around about this time of the year. And it's on how to build or how to transition into a building phase from dieting without getting fat as a natural lifter. So I think the first thing is to address the problem, which most people do, which I've done, to kind of just highlight firstly that if you have done this before or potentially might do it in the future, hopefully not after this video, it's okay. So I think sometimes you do have to learn the hard way. So the problem is for most people when they finish a diet or even just go into a building phase from wherever they're currently at, maintenance maybe, most men typically firstly call it bulking, which in itself is a very hefty word to be thrown about when it comes to a surplus of calories or building tissue. So I think rephrasing it maybe to a build, an improvement phase, a gaining phase, an off season is probably the first thing you should do. But most men bulk by forcing just food in. They think it's bulking season, bro, time to eat. You know, I've done my diet, I've done the hard work, time to just put loads of food in and get the scales rising up as quickly as possible because that's going to equate to more muscle. Very, very wrong. A lot of people chase scale weight. I've done this before, as I've mentioned on numerous videos over the years that I've done, that I unfortunately learned the hard way by chasing scale weight, 200 pounds to be exact, and it just wasn't a pretty sight. I wasn't building more tissue, I was just getting unhealthily fat, my appetite was in the bin, wasn't necessarily progressing too much in the gym, I felt unfit, I was getting out of breath walking up the stairs. There was a lot of things wrong with that time in my life, and I would never do a bulk like that again. And most men just end up getting fat with not much tissue to show for it, so make sure you avoid them things. I'm going to go through the next few slides in regards to how we can mitigate these things as well. So food in itself within a building phase is the most anabolic thing that we can use as a natural lifter or a natural athlete. Coincide with good sleep, of course, and good structure and good routine and good hormone health, etc. But you only really need to push your food when it's needed. You don't need to push food just because you feel like pushing food, or you don't need to push food because the scales have just stayed stagnant for a few weeks. Like, you don't need to rush your calories up. What I always say to my guys on the team is you've got this kind of runway, and if we just kind of push food from the off for the first few months, like continue this pushing, eventually you're going to hit your carbohydrate ceiling, which means things are going to slow down in regards to insulin sensitivity. The requirements needed for your body to actually want to build tissue is going to go down. And again, this is where you just kind of get fat. And the only time you should really ever push food is to increase your recovery. So if you find that you are pushing quite hard in the gym, you're still progressing within the gym, but your recovery is taking a lot longer. This is typically a telltale sign that you might need a bit more food because obviously your output demands are outweighing your input. So recovery, if that's slowing down, that's probably a good time to push foods. If your training performance stalls, which is probably the biggest one that I address with myself and with my clients as well. Okay, we always assess off training performance. If your scale weight is staying the same or even going down, but you are still progressing within the gym and being very critical with progressing in the gym as well. It's quite a loose term, progressing in the gym. Like if you're throwing about weights willy-nilly and you're saying that's progress, analyze your own training first. Are you actually progressing, or are you just kind of ego lifting and trying to jump the gun too early? Because again, like I've always said, and this goes probably in a different video in terms of training, but your muscles don't care what numbers on the pin, what numbers on the dumbbell, what numbers on the plates. It cares about a stimulus. It cares about a different stress response than the previous session to create an adaptive response, okay? So if your training performance starts to slow down and you are genuinely training well and accurate and with intent, then that might be another good sign to push food. And the third one is hunger. If you're constantly hungry, and this is a good sign as well, and I always say to my guys and myself that in order to kind of push foods within a building phase, you need to create the demand for food. You need to create a reason for your body to need more foods, and this obviously comes through training, good sleep, good recovery, etc. But if you are constantly hungry, coinciding with these other two things like recovery is slow and training performance is stalling, then that is probably a good sign to start to push your foods. But how much would you push them? I'd roughly always push carbs specifically, because carb is the main energy source, circa 20 to 50 grams per time, okay? So if, for example, you're on, let's just say for argument's sake, 300 grams of carbs for 1 week, okay? And all of these symptoms have shown that your recovery is slow, your training performance is solid and your hunger's up, I'd probably bump up anywhere between 20 and 50 grams. So maybe just go up to 325 grams of carbs for the following week. See how your body responds with that, and see how your recovery is. See how your training performance is different. So that's the three kind of things I'd look for, and how you'd approach that as well. Scale weight isn't everything. So as a natural, you can't gain muscle fast, unfortunately. I wish we could, but we can't. It takes a long time, and the longer that you can stay within a surplus within reason, the better. So ideally, scale weight isn't everything, but I typically would look for at least around 0.25 to 0.5% of your body weight gain per week. But don't take that as kind of set in stone. Again, if we've covered them other things, that your training performance is improving and your recovery is good, and visually, this is why it's so important to take pictures within an off season as well, because the scales won't tell you everything, okay? The scales won't tell you if you've built new tissue. Equally, the scales won't tell you if you've lost body fat, always, okay? So again, don't kind of take the scale weight as gospel, and don't think the scales are going up or the scales are staying the same, so therefore I am building muscle or I'm not building muscle. It's much harder to actually assess, and this is why pictures are very important as well. The long-term advantage. So obviously if you do, and again, I don't really think there's such thing as a lean bulk. Like, you can do a controlled build, or like a steady surplus, or whatever you want to call it. There's so many different terminologies for things nowadays, but essentially, if you do a slower, more gradual building phase, it's firstly going to mean you're not likely to get too fat. So therefore, your diet, when you come round to it, is going to be a hell of a lot easier, and you're not having to strip off, 30 pounds of just additional fluff that's unnecessary, because it means you're just going to have to work harder and run the risk of losing tissue at the same time. And it just gives you so much more work to do. The diet that I just did was the easiest diet that I've ever done. Arguably, well, not even arguably, definitely it was the longest diet that I've ever done, being 27 weeks. But because I didn't start the diet in a bad position, I wasn't fat when I started, I was relatively okay condition, it was just easy. I kept foods nice and high throughout the whole of the diet. Cardio never went up more than 60 minutes per week. And for me, personally, and I'm sure for a lot of people, that would be a much better selling point than having to absolutely work your ass off. Starting your kind of prep with doing like 4, 5, 6 cardio sessions within the first month per week. Just not fun, and where a lot of people run the risk of losing a lot of tissue as well. So don't get fat in the off season, less work to do in prep. No brainer. Also, less body fat equals less dieting time later as well. Like, if you are super fat, you're probably gonna have to diet for like 30 plus weeks. If you're not too fat, 27 weeks is still relatively long, but it meant I kept quite a lot of my tissue, and I was actually in a position where I actually built quite a bit of tissue within the first few months as well, which I think is something that a lot of people underestimate or don't think is a real thing, that you can still build muscle in a maintenance phase or even in a deficit. Arguably, it is a little bit harder, but it is still doable, and I most definitely did do it because everything was controlled, every variable was managed. Nutrient timing matters as well. So again, pre-workout and post-workout, arguably the two most important meals. All meals are important, but these two are going to fuel your sessions. Your sessions are going to facilitate muscle growth, or retain muscle at least. So carbs, again, this is probably outside of your, or inside of your kind of realm in terms of what carbs are for. So it's for fuel, it's the body's main energy source. Protein is obviously for muscle protection, in terms of preserving muscle, building new muscle, and just general health and well-being as well. And obviously, a relatively good amount of fats as well. So fats obviously help slow down digestion, and also help with, general health, hormone regulation as well. So pre-workout, I'd always go for some, easy digesting carbohydrates, anything like rice, anything like cream of rice-based seems to be the best for me personally in terms of digestion. Oats can be good for some people. Obviously, protein sources wise, you can have chicken, you can have yogurt, you can have tuna, etc. And then I always have a small amount of fats with around 10 grams of fats with my pre-workout meal, purely on the basis that it helps slow down the digestion slightly, so your body isn't just churning through them foods throughout the first 20 minutes of that session, and therefore it gives you a bit more preservation during the session as well, so you've still got that energy, and hence why we add a little bit of fats with the pre-workout. Post-workout, on the other hand, obviously you want a fast digesting protein source. Typically for myself, I have some form of shake, whey protein isolate, and then also like a fast digesting carbohydrate source as well, so any form of rice-based cereal. And again, each individual is going to digest food slightly differently. For me, rice digests really well. I can have that in, and for most people, to be fair, it digests really well. You don't want anything too heavy post-workout because you want to replenish lost glycogen, as quickly as possible, essentially. Again, when it comes to the training side of things, how not to get fat. is obviously making sure, again, I say this in most videos, but make sure you are logging your reps, your sets, and your loads, okay? Because essentially at the end of the day, if you're not tracking in, the gym or with your scale weight, you are just guessing. And this is something that I did for so many years, that just guessed. I just walk into the gym, that looks about the same weight as last week. Foods wise, it's probably time to push the food, so I'd have like an extra full bag of rice, whereas you don't really need to push that drastically from week to week, just a small surplus at a time. And then again, if the performance is climbing and you are progressing within the gym, not including things like scale weight or your look, then there's no need or reason to push the foods excessively. Another big one as well is when you are doing a longer, building phase, use mini cuts when you need to. I think a lot of people are scared, and there's quite a bit of conflicting information out there nowadays that, and I've just said it within this video, the longer that you can stay within a surplus, the better. However, that's within reason, and obviously if things are all still firing well in terms of, like I say, you're responding to the foods well, you're digesting the foods well, you aren't getting too lazy or sloppy and fat, assess every kind of 8 to 16 weeks. 8 weeks maybe on the slightly shorter side, but definitely every kind of 3 or 4 months I would assess and see where you're at, and just see if like a small, harsh, aggressive mini cut is needed, because it can help with things like appetite. It can trim body fat down slightly, which means you're going to be more receptive and responsive to foods coming in, which will obviously transition into more the direction towards muscle growth. And obviously it improves insulin sensitivity as well. So in reality, for a natural lifter, progress will be slow and steady, which if you can't accept that, unfortunately you are in the wrong game. Muscle gain is measured in months and years, unfortunately not weeks, unlike a dieting phase where you can probably see scale weight change and body fat coming off weekly, whereas in a gaining phase it is measured in months and years. Okay, so don't be kind of disheartened if you haven't grown 25-inch arms within the first week of your training block. And again, the last one, which if you watch this channel for some time, you'll know that this is the 2 key pillars, or at least 2 of the 3 key pillars that we focus on, is patience, consistency. Staying lean while building is what's going to allow you to, staying relatively lean, you are going to gain some body fat, of course, it's inevitable, you have to, unfortunately, as a natural lifter. You can't be walking around 30 pounds up, 40 pounds up from stage weight still shredded. It's just not possible, unfortunately, as a natural. So just patience and consistency, okay? Build smart, don't get fat, and set yourself up for easy diets in the future. If you have any questions on this video, as always, drop a comment below, leave a like, subscribe if you aren't subscribed already, because there's quite a few that aren't subscribed. But yeah, hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions in regards to how to transition from a dieting phase to a building phase, or how to set yourself up for the most productive building phase possible, please feel free to drop me a message, and I'll see you in the next one.